Welcome into Foxy Art, guys. So glad to have you here, and I'm so excited to get into this with you. Please remember that all of this footage is taken from Twitch Live. I do stream over there. I do all my painting. I do video gameplays. Go ahead and join me over there as well. Have a ton of fun in chat. Join in my Discord. Everything will be in the description box below. You guys are welcome to it. But let's go ahead and get focused on what we're doing today. Today we are going to be doing a Warhammer miniature painting. And this is a tutorial that's intended for beginners. So the people that haven't opened a box yet, or the people that want to level up their painting skills from just a single color, so you don't have just like one monochromatic model. So that's what this tutorial is going to be intended for. You guys, like I said, if you want some more entertainment or you want to ask me more questions about greater details and stuff like that, come join me on Twitch. Again, everything's going to be in the description box below. So let's get into this. Alright, so before we get into the bases and the washes, let's go ahead and cover over the materials that you're going to need in order to paint your model, to make your little dude look a little bit more official. You're going to need a primer, a set of model pliers, a model file, some plastic glue, an assortment of small paintbrushes, and I do specify small because these guys are, you know, small. And lastly, you're gonna need paint. Obviously, that's an important part of, you know, painting is the paint. There are a few other optional things as well that I like to, you know, just make note of because they make my life as a painter so much easier. The first is a plank. I know, kind of weird, right? This actually comes in handy when you are doing the primering. And I also like to include a cork and some sticky dots. And the reason why is because you're going to put your model on the cork to make it easier to paint with. Pretty cool, right? Oh, also, paper towels. Because, you know, things get real messy when you're painting. Alright, you know what? This is nonsense. Gotta get rid of some of this chaos. Watch. Magic of editing. Everything's clean, and look at that, it's all gone, and perfect, and amazing, and I wish real life worked like this. Power of editing, man. Alright, there is one thing I do want to cover, though, in this, because I don't feel like enough tutorial videos actually cover it, and for me, I didn't personally find this intuitive, and that's how the model is actually going to come in the box. So, when you buy a single model box, versus when you buy a box set. And because when I went from the single models here to this big guy here, I was so confused and so overwhelmed, but it's okay. So for those of you who don't know, when you buy a single model box like this one, it's going to come with one model instruction and one sprue. Granted, this is empty right now because I've already painted this model, and artists are hoarders, so that's why I still have all this. This, on the other hand, when you open it, holy cheese nips, look at this chaos. I mean, I know we're supposed to be like for the chaos gods, but oh my Jesus, look at this. You have sprues everywhere. You have bases. I don't even know. Those are like what, number counters? And you got a measuring stick in there? Man, oh man. Dude, look at all these booklets. Look at all this. And oh, core rules. That's cool. That's nice. Seriously though, this stuff is overwhelming and it gets confusing. And it also doesn't make sense to someone who's never had a big box like this that one sprue. Hey guys, Editing Foxy here. Just wanted to say that a sprue is what the model mold is made from. So you need to cut the model from the sprue. Does not equal one model. As you can see here, I've actually taken some out because this has been one model. These two up here are a part of another model. Like, you got the other two parts that are over here. Like, it can be confusing. So keep in mind, when you buy a big box like this, you're going to have to do a lot of reading. So these books right here, these little booklets, these are going to be your best friend. They are going to tell you step by step which ones to cut and how to put them together if you ever get lost or if you're ever confused. These guys are fantastic for that, and you have one for each model type. So this booklet goes for all of these individual models. This one goes for this specific hero. So one of the things that I would like to mention during the course of this video, I only use Citadel brand products. And the reason I use Citadel brand products is because, honestly, while they are more expensive, they are extremely beginner friendly. You don't have to worry about getting an incorrect product, or honestly a cheap product, like one that's going to ruin your $70 model. I know these things aren't cheap, man. And I would hate, and I've heard stories, and I hate to hear these stories of someone spending upwards of $100 on a single model and then going cheap on their paint or cheap on their equipment, and they ruin it. And that's heartbreaking to me, honestly. So being a beginner at this, I would honestly really bite the bullet and pick up Citadel brand equipment, mostly because as you grow as a miniature painter, you can move to cheaper equipment. There are some things that you can obviously substitute from the beginning, like I use a cork and a little sticky thing instead of using an official Citadel brand model holder. Stuff like that doesn't really matter, but when it comes to the physical model, don't go cheap, man. Not starting, at least. Don't do it. You're gonna have a bad time, you're gonna get frustrated, and please don't do it. So as you grow and you're more confident with yourself, then you can start using stuff like the dollar store brand acrylic paints, and you know how to water them down and you know how to mix them properly in order to get the right consistency and to do things properly for your actual model. So that is what I would really recommend with that. So there is some things that you should know about the techniques that I'm going to be showing you in this video today. All of these steps are basic, and because they are basic, they can be refined, they can be grown, and you can use them in order to grow your craft and reach that demon skull that you want so badly, if that's what you desire to do. All of these techniques that I use are techniques that professionals, which I am definitely not a professional, do not get me wrong, I'm far from it, but professionals do use. Those that create the box art, those that do that, they use techniques that are like these. Theirs are more refined than mine are, keep that in mind. But these are all techniques that you can use to grow yourself as a painter and get your model exactly where you want it to be. Alright, so jumping into it, I went into the booklets and decided which of the Flesh Hound variations I wanted to make this time around. And following the instructions, found the sprue that contained the individual model pieces. Once I found those, I took my model clippers and clipped out the individual model pieces as closely as I could to the physical model. And the reason I want to clip these so close to the model is because it'll cause less work for me in the next step, which is the filing. After finishing cutting out all of the individual pieces, we're going to take our model file and gently rub the edge against all of the connection points that the model piece originally had to the sprue. We're going to take away little tiny pieces of the plastic to smooth it out. We don't want any imperfections from where it had originally connected to the sprue, because any imperfection will be seen underneath the paint when we do move on to that part of the process. Keep in mind, this is a very long process. It takes time, and oh my goodness, do your eyes start to cross during this. Don't get discouraged. It does take a while, and it's okay. You know, these are the little tiny things that help to make your model look amazing and realistic and bring it to the next level. Once all of the pieces have been filed and made to be imperfectitious, we're going to move on to the gluing process. I highly recommend that you use plastic or model glue specifically over super glue. And the reason why is because the bond is actually going to be stronger. With how the plastic is made for the actual models, the glue will actually have a mild chemical reaction to the plastic. Now, this isn't a biohazard issue. Like, you don't need to be too worried about that. Don't go huffing it, but it's not a biohazard issue. What happens is it heats up very slightly and it melts the plastic. So when it dries, it actually reforms into one solid piece. During the gluing process, I would really recommend that you only glue together the major pieces that you need to. Smaller pieces that can be left to be glued to later, so that way you can access smaller nooks and crannies, I would really recommend leaving aside, so that way that process can be done after painting. So once your model is ready to go to paint, don't forget you need to primer it first. And one of the weird tricks that I like to do for my priming in order to make it simpler for myself is I take my model all glued and ready to go, and I just tape it onto that little plank of wood that I had at the beginning of the video in my list. And the reason why is because being in a rattle can, this stuff is pressurized. So little tiny pieces like this head, that's gonna go flying the second that paint tries to cover it. So I use this in order to keep things still and steady, so that way I can get an even coating of primer on it without globbing it, without having to touch it and fidget with it, or even getting it on my hand. It makes it so much simpler and so much easier, and you can let it sit and dry there, and the tape won't damage the bases or the interiors of your model. One of the other things that I would like to mention is the color of primer. So primer comes in a ton of different colors. As you saw, I actually like to use the white, and the reason for that is because I want my stuff to be bloody. I want it to be magical. I want the colors to be bright and in your face. And that's what you get when you use a white primer. Now, of the other colors, you do have gray, which is just the typical gray that the model is already. And that's going to neutralize everything. So your blacks are going to stand out equally as much as your brights. Now, if you were to go for a black primer, your black primer is going to make those deep, dark, and sinister colors really stand out much more. But if you want to do a brighter color, it's going to be toned down quite a lot. Another nice thing about using Citadel paint is that because it is manufactured by Games Workshop, you have a huge array of colors. So let's say you have an army of Ultramarines. You have 100 units that you have to paint. Well, guess what? They got that blue. So all you have to do, shake a shake of that baby, you can spray them on, and there's your base coat. Now you just move on to washing and dry brushing and highlighting if you want. And that's all you have to do. It makes things so much simpler. So look at your models and look at what you want to do for your model. If you want them bright and colorful, I would suggest a white. If you want dark and sinister, then I'd probably go for a black. If you don't quite know, I'd go for a gray. But then you take the cork and you put a little sticky thing on top of it. I'm currently using just like a little glue dot from Scotch tape. You take your mini and just stick. And there you go. You now have your own personal little holder for this. That way you're not like trying to figure out like where you can hold this to turn it around and not put your finger in wet paint. Another thing that I would like to bring up, because it can be confusing for someone that's never painted before, would be the different viscosities of Citadel brand paint. And I've created a graphic in order to help demonstrate what I'm talking about. So starting with texture and ending with shade, going from most viscous to least viscous. These are the 6 different types of Citadel paint that you will be experiencing in your time here. Now, you don't need every single one of these different kinds. I mean, half the time I actually don't, because I like to modify different kinds of paints in order to get what I want. I will typically use a base for my dry brushing instead of a layer. So it's alright, you can mix and match as much as you need to. But starting with texture, texture is obviously going to add texture to whatever you are painting. This is a very thick paint. This is something that contains additional things in it in order to get the texture that you want. There's textures that creates dirt, creates mud, that creates cracked ground kind of effect. There's even stuff that for snow. It's so cool! But it's obviously not going to be going anywhere. Once you put that sucker down, it's not moving. Next, we're going to be moving on to base. Your base coat is going to be really similar to your typical acrylic paints, and it is going to be the most pigmented out of all of them. Pigmentation basically just means how much dye, how much pigmentation there is in a certain unit of the liquid. So there's more pigmentation, there's more of the physical ink that is dyeing the liquid per unit in the base paint. So it's going to be nice and it's going to be thick, and it's going to make it so much easier to cover your mini in one coat, so you don't have to do multiple ones. Moving down to layer. Layer is going to be less viscous than base, but it is still going to be, the reason why it's going to be less pigmented is because it needs to be slightly thinner in order to seep into some of the cracks. It is trying to give layer and still allow for that base coat to come through pretty well viscous. That way you can still see it. Moving down, we're going to go next to technical. The technical is going to be you're starting to get into the watery side of things. So it's going to be the most pigmented out of the watery section. And same thing with contrast. Contrast is getting down into the really watered section, and it's going to be not very well pigmented. Lastly, there is shade, which is essentially just pigmented water. It is extremely runny, it's very thin. If you were to get it on your fingers and on your hands, it would show through absolute everything. There wouldn't be anything that would be hidden because of the shade, and what it does is it just sits on top and it creates the idea of shadows, or it can help create a gleam. I like to use a gloss shade to give blood and insides and whatnot that nice slick and wet look to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to put it right in our little palette. We're going to get as much of that little paint off as we can. Right in there. And we're going to come over here to our water. We're going to dip it in. Get a nice good amount on the actual brush. Dip it in again. And we're just going to start mixing that in. So now it doesn't stand on its own, but it's still thick enough that we can't see through it when we pull it away. When doing the base coats, I have always found that it is easiest to start with the largest color. So the color that'll take up the most amount of space on your model. Go from largest to smallest, so that way your details aren't overdone. And don't be afraid to get a little bit sloppy or a little bit messy when it comes to the smaller details, because you can go back in with a finer brush on the large area color and touch it up much more simply than doing one whole coat of everything and then trying to do the small details. Trust you me, it'll save you a lot of headache if you go from largest to smallest. Little toesies painted. See, little toesies. You're going to want to make sure that your base coat is as imperfectitious as you want it to be, because moving on to the next step, washes will make it harder to fix any imperfections that you may have. What a wash does is it sinks into the crevices to create a natural shadowed look. So, because notice how on this guy, how he's just all one color, there's no life, there's no anything. So, by adding in a wash, you actually create all of this depth. It's a bit of a combination of both. So with shading, you can't necessarily control it. What you want is you want to get that depth of flesh. So even my skin, holding it here and whatnot, it's creating a depth of flesh here, a depth of flesh here, and whatnot. So let's say I was a model and I was just painted my normal flesh tone. So if I was to put a shading on top, it would naturally lay here and here because it's so thin, it just goes straight to the bottom. That's all it does, it just runs. So it'll actually leave this part alone. So if you do it across, it'll hit naturally, and it'll be easier for you to figure out where you want those highlights. Get to shading. Now remember how I said that you want to do a nice midline color for your base. You don't want it too dark, you don't want it too light. The reason why is because if you do it too dark, then it's going to be hard to get that shade in. I have one Space Marine model that I've done. I'll get it here in a sec. If you go too dark on your base coat, it's going to be really hard to get that shade. You don't get that depth. You don't get those shadows that you want. Same thing if you go too bright. If you go too bright, then your highlights are going to be washed out. It's going to be harder to highlight. It's just, you're going to have to get creative on either side. So if you go too dark or too light, you have to get creative. So if I was to do, like on these back ones, these little back quills, since I made them pretty dark because I wanted them darker than the rest of the body, if I was to go for this color, what is flesh shade? Flesh shade is actually a really, really light wash. Don't let the bottle fool you. It's actually really light here. Come on, let's go on a clean finger. Boop. See? It's nice and light. I'm not actually flipping you off. Oh, of course. This is what I'm here for. So, it's nice and light. So if I was to put it on here, if I was to put it on the quills, it's not going to show up as much. It'll help alter the color a little bit, but it's not going to give it any depth. It's just going to give it another shade. So instead, what we're going to do is we have this one called Nuln Oil, which this one's a really, really popular shade. You can see how dark that is. That's a nice dark color. So that's going to give the depth that I want specifically for my quills. Now, if I was to use this Nuln Oil on the rest of it, it's going to wash it out. It's going to make everything too dark. It's going to make everything, well, I mean, it will definitely make it dirty. I mean, that's a good look if you want to go for that look. It'll make it look dark and chaotic and whatnot, but I don't want to go for that look personally. Keep in mind that all of these are personal choices. You can make it look like box art if you want. The nice thing about buying boxes is that every single one will come with an instruction booklet, and it will tell you, I thought it was also on the inside, it'll tell you on the back specifically all of the colors that they have used in order to create this exact model. So if you want it to look like the box art, buy these colors and follow these steps that I'm showing you now, and you will get this look. It will take time, it will take practice. Keep in mind, these are some techniques that require, you know, a bit of time and development, but they will all be there. So the nice thing about shade is that you don't need to water it down. This is one of the few ones you don't need to water. So watch how this goes. So, and by the way, if you use a dry brush, your brush is going to suck up all as much as it can. And the nice thing about using something like this, like a wash that's super, super watery, is that when you put it on and you put on too much, all you have to do is dry your brush off and then put the dry brush up against that spot and it'll suck it right up. So we're just gonna go start at the base and work my way up. I'm gonna actually hold this a little bit upside down so that way it doesn't puddle too bad. And I'm gonna let you guys see a close-up of this because it is so much fun to watch. So, because this is a nice bright color and a nice dark shade. Look at how that goes on. Look at how that just fills in that crevice. It gives it a little bit of extra depth and detail. Look at how that goes. Like how we did the fade here in the back, we're going to be doing something like that, but with the washes. So in order to create a nicer seam, because notice how this is just a pretty, hard seam, you have the back and then you have the quills. So I don't quite like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some of this Nuln Oil and we're going to jab it right there along that seam. We're going to darken up that seam as best as we can with this wash. We're going to get it just right. And because naturally the way how that would work is that it would also come down a little bit like this, that's totally fine. Go ahead and do whatever but you're going to keep on following that, and that's going to help. See, notice how already that seam is way less harsh. That's because that Nuln Oil is helping to pull some of that darkness down. It's not physically, it's just visually with your eyes, pulling that darkness down. It's giving it a fade kind of effect. So now that we have that Nuln Oil started, we're going to wipe off our brush. We're going to come right over here to this flesh shade because I want a lighter shade around the rest of the little bumps. So we're going to do that. We're going to dabby, dabby, dabby. Dabby, dabby, dabby. And we're just going to do that. And of course, because they are liquid, they will mix. But also because they are liquid, they will also fade. And that's what we really want. We want that nice, juicy fade. When you're taking a highlight, it's going to be the idea of the exact opposite of the wash, because you want the wash to be darker because you want it to imitate shadows, you want it to imitate life and depth in your actual creature, in your model. But we're going to take a lighter color than for what we're actually working with, and we're going to put it on top of everything else. So it's going to come out just on the tippy tops of everything. So all of these little bumps that you see, all of those little guys, those guys are going to get highlighted. And it's going to sound difficult, but I promise it's way, way easier than you think. Make sure to have this ready. So you're going to choose a color that's lighter. And because we went for a black kind of look through here, actually I want to go for a nice bright, I think I want to go for a nice bright red. Technically I could go for this corn blood red, because while it is really dark, it's still brighter than the black that's underneath of it, but I want these to really, really pop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to dip it in, and I'm going to get rid of all this globby paint. Now that the glob paint is gone, you're going to take your paper towel, your napkin, whatever kind of thing you have, and you're going to brush it. Brush it off, 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 off. Keep going until it's basically invisible. So, see how that goes? Where I started, and then how it fades into basically nothing. That's what you want. You want to be able to take your brush, maybe even do it a little bit more. This is called a bride brushing technique. And you're going to take that and you're just going to start right over top. Just real light, you're not going to dig in there. And it might take a little while. Sometimes you take a little bit too much off, and that totally happens. I think I just did that, in fact. Take a little bit off, and then you're just gonna tick, 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 tick. And sometimes it takes a little while for these things to be noticeable. Yeah, check that out. That's getting much, much better. That nice Warhammer Titan model, yep. No, I haven't done that. So yeah, you can see right there how nice those little bumps are getting. I know it's probably really hard to see still. But yeah, they're getting more and more visible as you go along, and you can just do this so many times until they are as highlighted as you want. And check that out. So I'm just like assaulting you with my camera. There we go, ish. But there we go. So getting those nice little highlights going on, like this was the original side that I haven't done yet. So that, oops, as I definitely assault my camera, to that. But, ooh, you can really see, so on this tongue, you can see how that gloss, so that's just a base coat and the gloss shade over top it. Gives that nice depth and it gives it that slick look. Looks like insides. I've always thought that of the gloss though. It's perfect for blood and guts. It's perfect for it. It gives that perfect shade of entrails and I'm gonna be too worked up. Until the very last step on the body. So here's the body, pardon all the static. We got all of our nice little dry brushing, we got all of our shade going on. Everything's nice and even. I can never tell where my camera is because I'm a dunce. So all the nice little highlights, then you can see the good nice shimmer of the gloss that we put on that tongue. And here she is, guys. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on this wonderful adventure of painting our adorable little flesh hound, which I have named Dimala. As you may notice in some of these photos, not only is she looking super fantastic, but there are some additional highlights on a few of her edges. And edge highlighting is one of those mind-numbing and eye-crossing techniques that warrants a video all of its own. So go ahead and follow me so that way you can go check out that video as soon as you are ready. I am your changer of ways, Foxy, and I will see you on the other side of the warp.